Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, a podcast presented by CTI Clinical Trial and Consulting Services. This podcast is centered on advancements in healthcare and elevating individual stories and their expertise. I'm your host, Jeremy Schran, and together with my co-host, Raina Graham,
Hello.
we will take you through a deep dive of CTI, clinical research, the patient journey, and much more. On today's episode of Moving Medicine Forward, we speak with Greg Ruff, founder and executive director of the Dilated Cardiomyopathy Foundation. He is joined by our own Bret Marshall, who has direct experience working with the DCM Foundation. Greg will take us through his journey founding the DCM Foundation, and together, Bret and Greg will explain why patient advocacy groups are so important to drug development, and how CTI works with these groups to have a more successful clinical trial. Raina, why don't you get us started today?
Well, welcome back, Greg. I know you have presented to CTI in the past internally, so we're so excited to have you on our podcast today. And then Bret, welcome back to the podcast. This will be your second episode. So we wanted to talk about patient advocacy groups. So we have Greg from the DCM Foundation, that's Dilated Cardiomyopathy. So tell us a little bit about what a patient advocacy group is.
One, thanks for having me here today. Great to see everybody again. A patient advocacy group really represents patients in several different ways with a certain disease or disease state. For instance, we represent dilated cardiomyopathy patients, which is a type of cardiomyopathy. How we represent patients really is in what we call three pillars for our organization. One is information education, outreach, newsletters, website, webinars, things like that. The second thing that we help patients with is patient support, different types of groups. People love to talk with other people with the disease and how they're dealing with it. So support groups, things like that. And then the third that pillar that we help patients with is really in the genetics area. A large percentage of our patient population has the disease because of a genetic mutation, and so we have a large genetic campaign about genetics and dilated cardiomyopathy that we can talk about later.
So describe the partnership between CTI and the DCM Foundation. How the two organizations work together.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to meet Bret probably a year and a half ago, not too long after my heart transplant. Came down and met your owner and a lot of the executive team got to present too. And one of the things that we've always been interested in is how can a patient group help pharmaceutical companies and CROs better recruit patients, better represent patients in clinical trials, research studies, and things like that. So in the last year and a half, we've been working on how we potentially could work together, especially in the genetic cardiomyopathy space, and are continuing our discussions and would hope to have a potential offering sometime in the near future.
How did you get involved with the DCM Foundation?
Uh,
Tell us a little bit about that background story.
Yeah, lucky enough to get sick. So I historically, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm 60 now. I started my first business in Cincinnati at age of 23. So I've kind of started, built, sold three businesses. In 2014, after being misdiagnosed or undiagnosed for a long time, which happens a lot with our disease, I was formally diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy, and it was caused by a genetic mutation, lamin A. And so I started at my care at Ohio State University. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and in conversations with several of the docs there, one which is a leading 30-year researcher in genetics and dilated cardiomyopathy, said, "Hey, Greg, there's probably a million and a half dilated cardiomyopathy patients in the United States, and there's no patient group representing them." And I had just sold my last business, an executive coaching business. I sold to Franklin Covey, and so I thought this might be something good to sort of turn my attention to. So Dr. Ray Hirschberger and I started the DCM Foundation early 2018.
I'm going to throw a question to Bret. Like, how do you identify, select patient advocacy groups to collaborate with?
I think it's more of an organic kind of path, not something we necessarily seek out. But I think what you heard from Greg speak about, and something I've come to appreciate for him, it's deeply personal. And so he can help characterize what an entire patient group is feeling. I think every patient has something to add. You heard from Greg, business background. He didn't seek this out as a business opportunity, really was thrust into it from his diagnosis, but importantly had the courage to act. And I think that's something that listening to the materials that they put out really try to drive a sense of community, a feeling that they're not alone, and a call to action or a way to take either their own care into their hands, try to seek care at heart failure specialists to hopefully not go through the same course as Greg went through, being misdiagnosed, kind of struggling to find out what's going on in someone that's extremely healthy, physically active, to having this symptoms or set of disease course. And so it's a lot of time, energy, and resource that he puts into this and developing a community. We just try to champion that and promote that on our platform through pharmaceutical companies that are developing innovative therapies, and really leveraging his understanding of the patient community, of how we can design better trials, make them more feasible to execute, and importantly, more time and cost effective for the development partners. We're all committed to trying to act in the best interest of patients and bring therapies forward, not just for the individual patients that contribute on the programs, but also the broader community that can benefit from these therapies post-approval.
What specific projects or initiatives are you collaborating on between CTI and the DCM Foundation? And then what long-term goals do you have between the two groups?
Yeah, I think it started really as more of a mission moment through CTI's charitable arm. Greg was kind enough to come down and just talk about his patient experience, his patient journey, try to give our employees a sense of what that patient is going through, really give a sense of passion or shared commitment to doing the work that we do every day. And then that has just kind of evolved into other elements. It's some marketing events to try to share his message to a broader platform. He has the patient group and that community well characterized, but really the pharmaceutical partners, which he's done a great job of integrating, all the leader uh, pharmaceutical companies developing therapies, the other advocacy groups that have maybe different patient populations on a global scale to bring together and to try to support those initiatives, like getting patients genetically typed, and then also, how can we efficiently get patients into clinical trials? How can we prepare them to understand what a clinical trial is, what the risks are associated with a trial, what the trade-offs are, but also the potential benefits, and give each patient an outlet to contribute to research, whether it be just taking their own care into their hands, getting better treatment with available therapies, maybe participating in a registry or a natural history program to better understand the disease progression, to establish endpoints that can be approvable for clinical trials, or to actually participate in a clinical trial itself and to potentially benefit from an innovative therapy, um, going forward. So I think those are just a few of the ways that we can support, have supported, and look forward to continuing to support Greg and his mission going forward.
Yeah, Greg, what are some of your key achievements from the DCM Foundation? Like some of those big markers or milestones that you guys have hit?
Yeah, I think that the biggest achievement to date is we've created a consortium of 8 patient groups that work in cardiomyopathy to address genetics and cardiomyopathy. So we call it the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium, which is Women Heart, Mended Hearts, Dilated Cardiomyopathy Foundation, DCM Foundation, HCMA, hypertrophic, SADS, arrhythmogenic, CCF for children's cardiomyopathy, Danon Foundation, Lemonet Cardiac, and then also Team Titan. So we've got a number of groups working together under a common goal of, one, increasing the awareness of genetics and cardiomyopathy. Our website is geneticcardiomyopathy.org. And so the state of the industry right now is that we know about the most recent research says about 50% of all cardiomyopathy has some type of genetic cause. As we learn more about genetics, that number is not going to go down, it's going to go up, but only a little over 1% of the people actually get genetically tested. So what GCAC does is one, we are increasing the awareness to patients in the medical community, the role that genetics plays in cardiomyopathy. Two, help them get to the right hospital or heart failure center for treatment. A very negative thing in the industry is right now is that the vast majority of cardiologists do not understand genetics and cardiomyopathy, and do not think that there is any need for it because it wouldn't change their therapy, which is just not true. And then the third thing, provide a better, less expensive, less friction way to get genetically tested. So that's been, putting that group together has been really great. And, we've had webinars and 500 people show up. And so, we've just sort of started. I think we're exploring opportunities for free genetic testing for cardiomyopathy patients in the works, and several other things. But we think that the patient groups really need to work together, because what happens there's about 70 genes that have been identified in cardiomyopathy, the potential gene mutations. A lot of them cross over. It mutates, you can get hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you can get arrhythmogenic, you can get DCM. So we really have to attack this, on a cardiomyopathy-wide basis, not on a DCM or HCM basis. And the last thing is, obviously, by having 8 and 9 organizations support one common program, you're going to get a much stronger, louder voice and be much more effective.
I think those are some staggering stats on the underdiagnosis of patients.
Yeah.
But I think really what's unique about Greg and his approach is trying to be a collaborative partner within those advocacy groups. I mean, obviously, a shared focus on the patients unites all those teams, and CTI included, but really trying to take an active role in solving those challenges for patients where they may not know what disease they have. They don't know the treatment options available because they don't know a diagnosis. So really, that's an important pillar that he has championed and really done tremendous work on, is getting patients typed. Importantly, the resources around dealing with a diagnosis. Greg knows this firsthand. It's not just the patient, but often the families and so many others involved in these types of inherited, diseases. And so, there's some barriers personally, financially, to getting typed, and there's also a support needed to understand now what to do with this information. How do I share that with family? How do I process that internally? How do I maybe participate in a clinical trial, or at least seek out a treatment specialist to get therapies that could help, maybe not be curative like the hopes of a gene therapy, but how to really just take the care into their own hands, which unfortunately that's what has to happen a lot of times, with the physician providers maybe not being up to date or as knowledgeable about some of these inherited gene therapies. But how can we get them to the right center, or at least the checklist of questions to ask to see, am I at the best possible place for care, or are there other areas? Unfortunate, Columbus, you mentioned a great center for patients within the community. And they're scattered throughout the US or globally, of where they can really seek out treatment options, have awareness of clinical trials and the impacts that they can have on their course for themselves and their family members.
Greg, you talked about the 3 pillars of your organization. Talk to us a little bit more about the info and education. You mentioned newsletters and webinars. How are you facilitating those, and who are you bringing in to educate patients on getting the right diagnosis and understanding their disease better?
No, that's great. And thank you. And also, we have 2 websites now. It's dcmfoundation.org and geneticcardiomyopathy.org. And we also have Spanish versions for each. So full Spanish version. We're very excited. Spanish population, 40 to 60 million
Right.
Americans, Spanish is the first language in their house. So, we need to address health equity. That's a huge thing. And we thought that was a big step in that direction. I think one is our website, and explaining dilated cardiomyopathy. That was obviously the first step in the disease, because it is confusing, because no people have the same path. Like at cancer, they do the stages, but in this disease and dilated cardiomyopathy, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And you can get more sick, and then you can get better, and it's interesting. And there is no cure. First of all, nobody ever gets a cure right now, But I think so. I think the website I think is good. Webinars we will bring in expert cardiologists that understand the disease very well. We'll bring in patients. We bring in folks from industry to talk about what they're doing, and that's a big thing to bring in industry to talk about hope because there is no cure for the disease. You either live with the disease a very long time, you die, or you get a heart transplant like I did 3 years ago. So the hope factor is really, really big. But the webinars are great to give people information. But again, going back, you really need to go to a heart failure center, normally associated with an academic university, or a heart transplant center to probably get the right help, quite honestly. So many people are not treated properly, what I would call the corner cardiologist. No disrespect, but they can treat a lot of other,
It's not their
disease
specialty.
that are not the specialty, especially in the genetics piece. So one of the things that we do, you'll see a campaign, and it's really simple. We don't have approved centers. We don't do any of that stuff. But we basically say, do a Google search and say heart failure center near me or heart transplant center near me. And 85 to 90% of the time, you're going to get the proper care. Maybe you have the laminate gene that my family has and I have. Maybe they're not an expert, but they will be sophisticated enough where to send you if need be. It's really that simple.
Yeah,
Simple Google search.
that's amazing. One thing that always strikes me about talking to patient advocacy groups is the passion and like the it's just amazing that like somebody who started businesses, had this happen and then just can create this organization and from the ground up. It's just really, really inspiring, and we love talking to the groups of people like that.
I think it's
Yeah,
a good
go ahead.
point because, like I mentioned, every patient has something they could potentially contribute.
Hmm.
Greg's skill set just so happened, to really fit the need at the time where, he witnessed firsthand
Yeah,
what the experience was like and his business mind of how to connect the right groups, make the right progress to motivate people against a common mission or goal that's, very personal with the high ethical, you know, um, and moral compass to really steer it in the right direction, which is exactly what a patient advocacy group should do. It's not to get people onto trials or, to boost certain aspects. I mean, that's an important piece, but it has to be right for that right patient and taking a very personalized approach to give them the supportive care, the information to make their own decisions, and the outlet to find, whatever therapy or treatment they may need on that spectrum. It may just be a heart failure specialist, maybe a clinical trial, it may be other avenues, but really trying to advance from transplant, which is pretty barbaric in many ways that we know from being found in transplant. There's a lot of issues with lifelong immunosuppression and recurrence of disease and so many other aspects that really to drastically move medicine forward. People like Greg, patient advocacy groups play a key role to that component, with awareness being probably paramount. Just understanding there are options, and then refining what those treatment options are for individual patients is really critical.
and how can the listener right now help? Like, what do you need? Do you need people to help us get your message out? Like, what are you looking for as far as moving your mission forward? What do you need?
Again, I keep focusing on genetics, and the reason is, one, it's personal. Like I do want my children to have the gene, and my grandchildren may have the gene if it tests yet. So I don't want them to die, but or get sick. But again, that's every family that has it, and so the really about the awareness in general in cardiology, the awareness the role genetics plays, especially in cardiomyopathy, it's really not there in the cardiology community, and they need to understand more people to get tested. Obviously preneonatal, oncology, genetics, genetic testing, genetic therapies play a much larger role. They need to do so in cardiology, but it's probably, 15, 20 years behind these other disease areas. And so that, to me, I think that's the big thing. Because when I look at the landscape of how people are going to be potentially saved and free of the disease, it appears genetic therapy is the answer. It's not perfect, and there's nothing. We have no examples of it yet, but everything I've seen and done, that's going to be. And there are a lot of very bright researchers, academic researchers around the country there are probably 10 to 15 companies, pharma companies, that have genetic pipeline therapies right now for cardiomyopathy. So there's a lot being done, but we've got to get the word out. We've got to get more people tested and aware of this. And I think we could probably save a very large number of folks. And also another thing with understanding genetics and cardiomyopathy are that, so my lamin gene at ICD or CRT, a three-wire device, probably about a third, 25 to 35% of all genetic cardiomyopathy has an arrhythmogenic component. And if you have, which often is not detected in ECGs or in Holter monitors, because the arrhythmias just happen every now and again out of the blue, and they can be fatal. And so one of the things is my belief is that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of people dying each year because they've been diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, but they don't know the cause of it, which could be a gene that causes arrhythmias. Insurance companies are willing to pay for those ICDs. I mean, it's not a payer issue at this point. They just don't know, so they end up dying of a heart attack or heart failure, and they could have been saved, and that's huge. So there really is an immediate need to get more people tested to find the solution. People are dying, and honestly, nobody seems to care. It's pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, that delay or the, being 10 to 15 years behind, it's kind of a sobering thought. A lot of it's driven by funding. I mean, you think about oncology, it's been a
Yeah.
priority in the public. It's been a priority for various organizations to commit research development dollars there. Certainly that's a component of it. And hopefully, as the market is better understood, there's more likely to have investment. These companies, the 10 to 15 currently pursuing it, make progress. There's been, recent research papers that identify new gene mutations, advances in technologies to treat a broader array of these diseases. One thing with lamin A that kind of shocking that, it's close to 500 different mutations that can result in lamin A. So how do you treat that with gene therapy? It's not a traditional, gene replacement or something. So it's kind of an evolution of what treatment modalities we have available as well. But it's an exciting time, and I think Greg's role in helping to accelerate that and hopefully catch up is really critical because having those patients genetically typed is a key step in the awareness of that, and hopefully we can make progress in a more rapid fashion. I think the FDA has opened up some avenues to try to get products approved quicker, and then certainly rolled out to a broader group of patients that can benefit, that can be saved, as Greg mentioned, or kept off a transplant list that has its own challenges with wait times and organ availability and so much. So for the whole system, I think it makes a lot of sense. And outside of just individual patients, the impact that can have, but on the entire ecosystem, tremendous role that Greg's helping to pioneer really in many ways to get these patients onto trials.
In your opinion, at what point should the genetic testing take place? You shared your personal story of your kids have been tested, your grandkids have not. At what point should a patient be tested along their journey?
Yeah, I mean, so the guidelines are actually in place already. So the AHA, ACC guidelines, I think HFSA also, guidelines are is if you're diagnosed with idiopathic cardiomyopathy, it's the recommended course of action is genetic testing. It's just not happening. And then also, if then you are, as a proband or as a patient, shown to have a genetic mutation that causes your cardiomyopathy, all first-degree relatives should be genetically tested. And so, and I also am on the national board, the American Board of Genetic Counseling. National Society of Genetic Counselors helped us put everything together for GCAC. So there's some, somebody that knows something about this has helped us.
Yeah.
But so it's interesting that the guidelines are there, but there's a lot of reasons why people aren't tested, and it's a lack of knowledge from a lot of cardiologists. It's also a lack of genetic, being able to get genetic testing. There are only 400 cardiology genetic counselors in the United States, which means, and if you go to the big institution, there's 3-4 month wait. I think Cincinnati Children's is probably the only one that doesn't have a wait. When I talk to all the big, heart failure centers, they'll have 2, 3, 4, 6 month waits to talk to
Wow.
a genetic counselor. So then AI technology needs to play a bigger role in that because they're just not going to produce more, cardiology genetic counselors that fast. So there's a lot of it's like a death by a thousand cuts. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Little things. I mean, there's not like anything evil going on,
Yeah.
but there's just you kind of add all these things up, and
Perfect storm.
because
Yeah.
logically, rationally, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal in that, like it should happen, but there's just so many points that
And
need.
without an advocacy group, patients have to navigate that on their own and try to piece that together. And so,
Mhm.
really trying to create that, curate and have that available to patients is a key step in trying to shorten wait times, even if some things are out of our control at various institutions. How can you really expedite that in some way that's meaningful to patients?
Right. You talked about collaborating with sponsors. How do we get sponsors more involved with advocacy groups? And, the CRO is kind of that bridge between the patients and the pharmaceutical companies, but how can we collaborate amongst those three groups?
No, that's great. And so I look at the stool, the four-legged stool, to sort of help create positive change in this area. One is the medical community, the cardiologists, the people you go see. Two are the cardiology academic researchers. Three are the patient groups. And then 4A and B are pharma, and then the CROs that tend to conduct the clinical trials and things. And so we all need to work better together. And then I also think I do have a strong business background, so I approach this a little differently. I do think the patient groups need to play and should play a more significant role in the process. They can identify patients.
Mhm.
They can do a lot of things, and that's one of the things I've taken is that I think we need to up our game to be a representative, to really be a strong sort of fourth leg to that stool and help all these organizations. Because in the end, I look at if I spend any time doing what I'm doing within the foundation or this arena, I got to try to help the most people not die. I mean, right, and this seems to be the way to do it, but we have to play like with GCAC and with what we're doing. We're actually able to identify. We have a pretty sophisticated system to help identify patients that might or might not be interested in, but they got to be tested, right? And then you give them the straight facts. Do you want to be in this clinical trial? Do you? And we represent a lot of academic research studies. And hands off. We're not gonna entice you. We're no way gonna try to sell you on it. We want to let you
Making that
know.
connection.
But reality is the patients are looking. They're desperate. There is no cure. I mean,
Absolutely.
Right.
they look at absolutely everything that comes down the pike. But they may decide not to participate. But as with uh, uh, GCAC, our sort of slogos in cardiomyopathy, the my, capital MY, stands for myself, my family, and my legacy. And so, even if you don't want to help for myself, my family is a huge motivator. And then my legacy is, how do I help the general community? How do I help a lot more patients not die? And it's surprising. I mean, patients, they just don't know. It's not that they're not interested, but if we get a lot more patients tested and they know, I think getting patients in research studies and clinical trials is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You talked about the patients and connecting with them. Obviously, they can find you if they were doing their research. How do you find patients
Yeah, and
from an advocacy group?
yeah, it's great. And it's really difficult with HIPAA. You can't really
Mhm.
like, hey, go to whatever heart failure center and give me all the
Right.
patients. And that stuff doesn't happen. And it's not easy. It's pretty difficult. So obviously social media, DCM Foundation has a 10,000 person Facebook group. We partner with other heart failure, cardiomyopathy types of groups that represent about 100,000 people. We have Google AdWords, since we're a nonprofit.
Yeah.
We $10,000 a month, so we're really, we have a consultant that helps us, and we're looking to get the word out via online. Our partnerships to the other patient groups is really, really important. So it is it's a constant struggle. We're making a lot of progress, but we need to make a lot more progress. But it's kind of your normal marketing,
Mhm.
but your patients are hidden.
Right.
Referrals,
Mhm.
obviously, cardiology, genetic counselors are great. A lot of the heart failure centers, the doctors are really, really good too. That's a big, because they can help them medically, but from a community, from a patient to patient information standpoint, they can't really help them.
And that also seems like an opportunity where a CRO could step in and help make those connections with key players at the hospital sites that we're working with. That'd be a
Absolutely. I mean, we have longstanding relationships with a lot of the academic centers, and I think a great partner in an advocacy, is an opportunity to engage them early, um, understand, what's coming up in terms of new therapeutics, also to, host ad boards to try to design better trials. I mean, certainly the advocacy groups understand the patient journey, the patient perspective. I think the onus on us and, pharmaceutical companies is to take that input and design a trial that is feasible, that is accessible, that has considers the different diversity elements, that makes it you know able to be widely uh, shared across different groups, across different geographies, and to make an impact. And I think those are just a few ways that we can help support on more of the technical trial aspect. Obviously there's a lot of commonalities in rare disease, but it's that nuance that really, if you get it right, if you understand, the individual patient or disease symptoms, uh, really make a difference in patients getting on, but also the quality of the data and the outputs needed. With an example being fatigue. Obviously these are long clinic days, and so if you have a certain order of how you do the procedures, you may impact the outcomes in some ways if a patient's tired or having, significant symptoms. And so really trying to take the feedback from advocacy, our academic, investigator partners, pharmaceutical companies on the design side can certainly help. And I think Greg's group does a tremendous job of sharing those patient stories, perspectives on podcasts, and understanding underlying symptoms that can influence, those treatment outcomes, what the correct endpoints should be. And in rare disease, we're dealing with really small patient numbers. So every patient matters, every data point matters. That's really the legacy component is, the big picture, what we want to get to. And it's a lot of little steps, the right, call on how to design something, how to collect something that makes the difference and really paving the way for future generations, future patients. And if we do it right, I think certain groups or adolescents that may start on a clinical trial, you know, hopefully, and we've seen this on several programs, they go off to college, they have major life events, that we take for granted, I think, in good health, but really, how can we facilitate those life events to happen, still collect the meaningful data that we need to open this therapy up to broader patients, I think is, important piece and something that we get a lot of perspective from through patient groups and patient stories directly.
That's great. And if I could add to Bret, he mentioned health equity, which we talked about our Spanish version of the website. Also, I mean, historically, whether it's academic research or it's clinical trials, there's always been a bit of an issue. Major medical centers tend to cater to a certain type of population, and there's a lack of diversity or health equity there. And so I think when people are doing research studies or clinical trials, they're always going to work with, principal investigator at an academic medical center or medical center, and that will always happen, should continue to happen. What I think patient groups add is we call direct to patient. So just by nature, our outreach is to the general population, social media, right? Almost everybody. I mean, there are some that wouldn't have Facebook or whatever, but you're going to create a much greater diversity or health equity, diversity of candidate, one geographically. So that's at least. And we've also seen that it's also, socioeconomically, racially, things like that. So, I think that anybody doing a clinical trial, anybody doing a research study needs to have a strong and good direct and effective direct to patient outreach, because I know the NIH, I know the FDA, health equity is a huge component of that. And so I think what patient groups can really bring that to, again, academic researchers and or clinical trials. So
Yeah.
So what would be some advice that you would give like another advocacy group or another CRO or biotech to help strengthen those relationships or strengthen the stool, like any kind of learnings that you've had as you've built this foundation?
Yeah, I think you have to have funding, but I think don't really concentrate on funding. We're getting funding, and CTI has been a good sponsor of ours. And so, but I think you try to solve problems. And what are the problems, and what is the problem? How do we go about solving the problem? So I think if you solve the problem, funding will come, right?
Hmm.
Just getting money for money's sake really doesn't do anybody any good. And then the second thing is I think partnering. We all like to live in our own silos and think that, wake up in the morning, some mornings and think I'm the smartest guy in the world, but you know what? I'm not. And so it's really important that groups partner together, and, the patient groups, and even if there's not 100% crossover, that you partner with different groups. You need to partner with CROs, with pharma, with the medical community. I think it's really, really important because, together you can accomplish a lot more. You get a diversity of thought, and, you get 9 smart people in a room. You're going to come up with a lot better solution in the end than one smart person in the room. So I think those are the things that I would recommend. But and I don't mind. I mean, I'm a business background, raising money or asking for money, but I think what I found we've really focused on, like, our budgets are really thin for what we're accomplishing. We don't have that much money, and I'm proud that with very little money we're accomplishing what we do. I think that's the way it should be. I think, but focus on the solution, and people are willing to support that.
Thank you, Greg, for joining us today, and Brett for coming back. We really appreciate you sharing your experience with the DCM Foundation, how it came about, the importance of info and education, patient and family support, and the need for genetic testing. So thank you for coming in today and sharing your story and your knowledge with the wider community.
Thank you, and thanks CTI for the support and all that you do for the patients in our community.
Thanks for your commitment to the patient groups that you represent and being a driving force for that collaboration that's key, that we've talked about several times throughout. So look forward to continuing to support and seeing what the DCM Foundation can achieve in such a short period of time with this tall task of really focused on the patients. I think that's what we're shared most excited about through our collaboration, and looking forward to continuing.
Right. And I think it's always, you mentioned the driving word of your foundation, hope. So hope for
Hope.
moving medicine forward.
That's what we need, hope.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy discovering how medicine is moving forward, or you are interested in how CTI could help you with clinical research, be sure to subscribe. Follow us on social media or visit our website at ctifacts.com.